Hi, and welcome to the McGraw Research Report. My name is Dr. Dan McGraw, and today I'm very excited to introduce a new program. We are launching a new show on the paranormal called Paranormal Mysteries. And to my right, Bob McDermott is going to be hosting that show. And our first guest for today, to jettison the show, is a UFO researcher. His name is Mike Stevens, and he's a regular presence here on ECTV. So some of you viewers are probably familiar with him. And I'll let the two guests introduce themselves, and maybe you want to give Bob, maybe you want to give an overview of how you see your show taking off and the direction it's going to go.
Yeah, we're going to have a show. It's called Paranormal Mysteries here in Exeter. We're excited about really twofold. Number one, giving a voice to people in the paranormal that can come on a show and talk about what they do and how they do it with no fear of being ridiculed and everything else. The second issue is that we really want to do a show for the people of Exeter that have an interest in UFOs, have an interest in ghost hunting, have an interest in witches. We're going to bring some witches on. So we got a great lineup of paranormal people, because the truth, Dan, is that the word paranormal has transcended to mean ghosts for the most part. And it truly means anything that can't be defined by science, mathematics, and I've added my own, logic. Mm-hmm. Because to all of this, there is some logic, and Mike, you run into it a lot too, where something happens and you can logically explain it away. But other than that, the paranormal has many disciplines to it, and what we're trying to do this year is to bring all those disciplines on at different times, so we really give the people of Exeter a chance to hear it all and what they're interested in.
Give us a little background on yourself, Bob, how you got into this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been in it about 15 years. I ran a paranormal investigation group, and I really got into it because I had kind of an episode in Bermuda where I thought I saw a full-body apparition.
As in Bermuda Triangle?
Yeah. Okay. My wife and I were on a cruise, and the truth is that I came back saying, what did I really see there? I mean, what was that? When I started to research it, it just goes on and on and on. So I put a small group together that might help in some of the data search.
What was your experience?
I saw a full-body apparition standing in a hallway, dressed in period dress, and I thought there might be some sort of a show going to be on or exhibit.
Was that real?
Yeah, it was that. Oh, yeah, it was that real. Yeah. Wow. When I went downstairs and we were leaving, we talked to the ranger, and the ranger said, "Oh, no, that's Pete." I said, "Oh, Pete is he an actor or something?" He said, "No, he's our resident ghost. Lots of people see him." So, I thought he was kind of,
And what was the setting? Where were you?
I was down a hallway. I had just come out of a museum. There were 4 floors to this building. It's the old governor's mansion.
Okay.
And it was only about 4 or 5 people in the building at the time. And when I came out, I turned and I saw this character standing down the hall, and I kind of waved or nodded, didn't respond. And I said, well, maybe he's in character, right? If you've been to any of the colonial Williamsburg, they stay in character all the time, even when you're chatting with them for directions. So I didn't think too much of it, to be honest with you, until the ranger said that. And that kind of triggered it. Is this guy just playing with me now? I'm a tourist and I understand that. Or is this real?
What kind of museum? What were they?
In the museum, there were a lot of old pictures of the governor's mansion,
From the 19th century?
19th century, early 19th century. Of course, Bermuda has a tremendous...
So who would this guy have been?
I don't know.
This was?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yep.
The other thing about the paranormal, Dan, is when you have an experience like this, very similar to UFOs, half of the people believe you did have it, and half of the people believe you didn't have it.
Right.
But it happens so quickly. We were talking about this before we went on air, that people say, well, did you get a picture of this? Did you capture this? It happens so quickly that you don't have a chance, do you?
Right.
You just don't.
Right.
So, like I said, I put a small team together to do some of the data research on the paranormal. And lo and behold, we put a website together, and we started getting phone calls from residents saying, gee, I have a ghost in my house. I have something in my house. Will you come out and look at it? I said, well, we can try. I don't.
This was just word of mouth?
Just word of mouth.
Wow.
Yeah. I would say, we were talking about this earlier, I would say that back 10 years ago, we were probably averaging 8 to 10 home investigations a month. A month. Now, not for 12 months, but certainly for 10
And
months.
you're not
out of the year.
advertising the service, it's just
Word
of mouth.
Yeah, just putting out a Facebook page, or back then we put out a website. I had a website.
Okay.
At one point I had 18 investigators, and we were pretty busy all the time. I think that's kind of dropped off a little bit now.
Wow.
I don't see that same interest in the homeowners.
Right.
And I think a lot of that probably has to do with, the TV shows that are on. Back then, there was one show called Ghost Hunters. I know both of those individuals because I lived in Rhode Island. And they were really the fathers or grandfathers, I guess you could say, of the paranormal shows. They put out the first one, and then all of a sudden, like you have today, you probably have 10, 12, 14 paranormal shows on.
Yeah.
So I think it's saturated the market
Yeah.
where it is. So what we want to bring to the Exeter folks that watch this show is real talk about the paranormal and what happened, some of our stories, because we all have a ton of them. And we hope through that we're educating people as to what it's really about. It's not a show that's meant to convince anybody that ghosts exist or they don't exist. I think you have to make that decision yourself. And I think it's like UFOs. If you see one, then you know they're real, no matter what anyone else thinks.
So but that's maybe a good segue to introduce Mike. You chose Mike as your first guest for kind of this.
Yeah, Mike is our first guest, and we wanted to launch this show because of the Exeter incident, which we'll talk about in a while. But I'd like to introduce Mike Stevens. I'm very proud to say Mike and I have been friends for probably 10 years. We've certainly been through a lot together. Mike is, without a shadow of a doubt, the most knowledgeable individual of UFO sightings and abductions and contacts, I think, in the state of New Hampshire. I'm going to let him explain what he does, but his group actually sits down with people that have had contact with UFOs, and it's a focus group that they get to talk amongst themselves. And I said to Mike before we came on the air, I think that's wonderful because I don't think any other UFO group, MUFON and some of those groups, do that with people.
MUFON is?
MUFON is Mutual UFO Network. And what they are, Dan, is they're a national group that that have investigators in different areas, regions. And those investigators, if you call them and say, I saw a UFO, they'll come out and document what you saw and everything else. Then they pass it on into the national branch and they archive it and so forth and so on. And that's what really Mike does, without belonging to MUFON necessarily. So I'm going to let Mike introduce himself and tell you about him.
Yeah, so tell us your story, Mike. This is my first time to meet you, and I know you've told me you do a program here, but...
Yeah, so, my name's Mike Stevens. I run Granite Sky Services, which is our organization for anybody who's had any type of UFO encounter, extraterrestrial, whether it's, a classic abduction case and there's trauma involved, to the other side of the coin where people have had more almost spiritual type encounters with them and only have good experiences with them. So we've kind of opened up the board to anybody with that and a mix of everything. And along with that, we do like 4 social meetings a month to really just, it's not to like sit down and hammer out the details of everybody's case. It's to build a community, really, to give them a safe place to talk about this stuff. And along with that, we're really big on preserving, the UFO history, especially here in New Hampshire.
How'd you get into it?
I've been interested in it almost as long as it's been interested in me, is what I tell people. I had an experience when I was about 3 years old, not too far from here in Southampton, New Hampshire. And that kind of was always in the background growing up, and other stuff had happened along the way. And I eventually got to a point where,
So what was this experience? Is it too personal to
No,
tell?
no, I've said it before. The first time I remembered anything like this happened, I was about 3 years old, and I was at my grandmother's house, and there was some type of family function going on. It must have been like a birthday or something, because there were aunts, uncles, the whole extended family was there. And the way my grandmother's house was set up, off the dining room, there was a little like 3-season porch that overlooked the backyard. And when I walked by the dining room past this, there was like this immediate, intense calling to get outside. I don't remember getting outside, but I found myself in the driveway with my cousin, who's about 6 months older than I am. We weren't raised like that. You know, the chance of one of us making it out the door without anybody stopping us was, you know, probably not going to happen. Both of us did.
Wow.
No. So we were just kind of both standing in the driveway. We didn't know what was going on. And then all of a sudden, the woods behind my grandmother's house just started glowing like this intense red light. And as that was happening, finally, you could see this craft emerge above the top of the tree line. And then kind of like floated over towards us in the driveway and parked itself next to this big tree at the end of the driveway. We watched it for a little bit. Well, it watched us as well. There was this really internal feeling of, you know, being watched and stared at. A light came on in the thing, and you could make out shadows of humanoid figurines, you know, heads and shoulders, but you couldn't really make out any details. And then there was a big blank in my memory, and the next thing I remember is this object at the other end of the driveway by the road above a telephone pole, and it kind of sat there for a minute and then just shot up into nothing and disappeared. And that was kind of my first encounter into all this.
Wow.
Mike, let me ask you a question, because, you know, one of the things that we always hear is there consistencies from one story to the next? And or at least a few things, do you say, well, they're always a round disc, or there's always lights, or something like that. Having that experience that you had and remembering it from age 3, you said, right?
Yeah.
And your cousin was 4 or less. Remembering that much detail, when you hear people now talk about sightings and even abductions, did they describe the vehicles similar to what you remember seeing?
Some do, some don't, and I think reason for that could be the age, or that the vehicles are actually different. I mean, I hate telling that story because, like, mine was that typical saucer shape, and it just sounds so cliche, but that's what it was. I don't, you know, and, you know, sometimes somebody will tell their story.
Sorry, my UFO experience was cliche.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And, you know, and sometimes somebody will
I'll try to
tell a story, and you're like, oh my God, the scenario's a little different, but you're telling my story, and you don't know my story. And sometimes it's so off the wall, it's not in any of the literature, but it's true to them. And it depends on the age and how in-depth the experience was, or their recall of it. You know, because I know people who had encounters at that age, but they don't remember big-eyed aliens or UFOs. They remember being scared of Humpty Dumpty coming into their room.
Yeah, right.
I know other people who were scared of the Jolly Green Giant. And, you know, and that's kind of the problem, where we take this people not proof. We look at the experience and the human side of it, not necessarily, you know, the nuts and bolts facts of this, because do I think the Jolly Green Giant was in their room? No. Do they really think? No, but that's what they remember. That's what their brain put in place so they could, you know, function. And, you know, they're not lying, but it might not be the actual truth. That's their experience, so.
One of the things that Mike puts in his mission statement, which I found extremely interesting, and it's in quotes, he says, it's about people, not proof. And I find that really a telling statement that sends a message to people that says, come in here, tell us your story, and we're going to listen to it, and we're going to accept it for what you're telling us. And that has to make people feel very comfortable, because I think, and I see this all the time with ghosts, people are really afraid to tell their story outside of a small group. Some are afraid to tell their spouse. And I'm sure that's the same way with UFOs.
It is, and I mean, because it's so easy for people who weren't there to trash it, say like paranormal. Somebody could say, oh, I heard knocking, and I could walk in and go, yeah, see, it's easy. Like, I debunked it. You didn't hear it? Nothing strange happened. just because there is a logical reason doesn't mean that is always the reason. You know, you can't, if you weren't there, you can't really say, you know. Some of these people, they see stuff and then people are like, oh, it's just planes, it's just this. Like, how many planes have you seen? Have your body didn't react to any of those other planes? I mean, there's other non-physical triggers.
Right.
There's a psychiatrist at the turn of the 20th century who was a student of Freud's. His name was Carl Jung. And in his autobiography, he talks about investigating these kinds of experiences. And he said, thoughts or beliefs are facts. So I can investigate a thought. I can investigate an experience that somebody has. I don't have to have something external to match that to say there's some reciprocity between what's going on inside and what's going on outside. Right. But I can say this is a fact. So if I want to investigate people's experience of God, I can investigate their experience of God because, you know, this is your experience, this is your experience, this is my experience. All of a sudden, we, as you say, we begin to see a consistency, and there's an internal consistency to these stories that then begins to say, well, you know, these are common experiences that humans have. I don't have to prove it outside of your experience is what I'm investigating, and I'm just reporting your experience.
Right. And we see that a lot, even in the ghost side of the paranormal, that people believe what they saw. I mean, one of the most common things in the paranormal, you know this because I know you're a paranormal investigator also, but that people will tell us shortly after someone has passed, they'll be at the foot of their bed. And the interesting thing is, every time somebody calls me with that story, they seem to say the same thing, that they're usually smiling.
Oh.
Usually smiling. Now that into itself is pretty cool, right? Because I think they're saying, don't worry about me, I'm okay. I'm in a good spot right now. But more important than that is that if you hear that constantly, right, then you start to say, well, there's the common denominator that makes this, at least in their mind, true.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
It's a psychic fact, for sure.
It's a psychic fact, sure, yeah. Mike, do you think that, I always found Roswell extremely interesting, only because...
Mind if we
No.
just get a little bit more of
Go ahead.
your history? Because you said this experience found you as much as you found it. And I think that was your experience, too.
It was.
That it found you.
Yeah, you asked the question, Dan, why does it reach out to me?
Yeah.
I mean, why does it reach out to Mike and his cousin at age 3 and 3.5?
Yeah, and how come I got left out?
Well, yeah, you know, I think people think that. People say, well, wait a minute, you had an experience, he's had it, why don't I have these
Why
experiences?
don't I get to have one?
You know, I hear constantly from people will say, you know, my father came through a medium to my sister, but he won't come through to me. Why not?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. He doesn't like you.
Yeah, doesn't like you.
So give us the arc of this story and some of the specifics. It's you know, just to be in the presence of these stories is kind of awe-inspiring, really.
It is.
And I think maybe that is another telltale sign of it being real, is that for the listener, there's an awe, you know, about it.
Right.
And you're awed by the experience.
Yeah, I mean, like Bob was saying earlier, alluded to a little bit, you know, people are like, well, where's the evidence? Why don't you pull out your camera? Everybody's got a cell phone on them now, you know. We were I was with Valerie, who co-hosts my show with me, and another individual we were working with, and my daughter, and we were up at a cabin, and we were doing some work to actually try to call in some UFOs there, and it appeared to work. We not at first. We were about to give up. It was like midnight. We're on top of this mountain. It was like, all right, good try, but we'll give it up. And all of a sudden,
This is a mountain that was known for sightings?
no, we were it was
Just a random mountain.
yeah, it had a cabin on it you could rent up in Jackson, New Hampshire. So I was like, all right. So as soon as the first person noticed it, we all kind of noticed it, but we watched that thing for 45 minutes. 3 of us, the only one besides my daughter, were all trained paranormal investigators, all sitting on cell phones. You're caught in the moment, and you kind of realize when you're stuck in it, one, you're just so involved with what's happening, you're not thinking, oh my God, I got to take a picture, because you just want to have the experience. But, 2, it's not meant to be,
It's almost sacred.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, well, why not me? Why not me? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with you. It's just, but when you're in that moment, I think it's because you're the right type of people. I see people who go out and do these C5s, which is, trying to call in crafts and stuff, and there'll be 200 people there because they think if they have all this energy that it'll work better. But it's more the right energy. You're better off with 4 of the right people than 200 of the. And I think probably the same if you try to do seances or that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, mediums go one-on-one. Tell me, Rick, when you said you were at the top of this mountain with your family, and you're trying to make contact, you're trying to bring the contact to. What do you use to do that?
We had been working on, it was kind of an experiment at first to see how it would go. Stars actually make sounds.
Right.
So we had a recording that, I don't know who did it, mixed and looped together, almost like a musical track of different stars, and I forget the stars that are on this track. But we were meditating to that weekly as a group and daily individually with this intention of making contact. And we're starting to get some success with it.
So you think contact through energy, through your energy?
Are you both familiar with the idea of like spirit guides?
Yep.
To me, I think there are physical, flesh and blood,
Yep.
Creatures from not here. But I think it works the same way. I think, this is my other problem why we do the people not proof and more the experience thing is the nuts and bolts guys had their chance. They haven't come up with anything. 1, let's get to the people and help them. But 2, it goes way beyond anything anybody's, ever really dwelled into. They started to, but there's a very consciousness part of this where it's not even physical. It's not. It's totally subjective. It's non-provable.
When you say spirit guide, you asked us if we knew what it was, but maybe not everybody's familiar, or maybe you could describe it in more detail.
For me, it would be just like a lot of people, depending on. That's the problem with all this stuff. It's we all talk about the same things, but use different terms. But so for some people, it might be more like guardian angels. For some people, it might be past relatives who are just kind of hanging over your shoulder, looking out for you. Could be animals,
Right. Yep. There's a lot of documented cases of car accidents. There's a famous one out in California where there was an accident in heavy traffic, and this individual managed to get out of the automobile. He was standing there, and a car is coming, loses control, heading right for this individual. And this individual knows it's over. I'm going to get jammed in here. And he finds himself seconds later on the sidewalk. And he said that he knew when he felt that spirit guide lift him up and take him to the sidewalk, he knew he was being saved. Now, he didn't feel physically, as you didn't feel physically when you were taken outside, right? I mean, you didn't feel anything physical.
No.
Right. So he tells us that, nothing was physical. I didn't feel somebody pick me up, but I knew I was going to die. I was faced with that, and I knew this guy's going to hit me. I can't get out of here. And next thing, he's on the sidewalk. The car ultimately did broadside the car that was broke down or in the accident. So there are a lot of documented stories like that. And if you're like Mike and I, we believe everybody has a spirit guide. Whether we make ourselves known to that spirit guide or they make themselves known to us is opening your mind up. And I'm kind of going there with you. I think when you're on that mountain, that you're opening your mind up, and this is energy, right? You're sending out some sort of a signal, whether we can hear that signal or not, right? And you're hoping they're going to respond to that signal.
Correct.
Yeah.
So spirit guide, you're kind of matter of fact about it.
Yeah.
You have one,
Oh, yes.
and you're aware of the presence of this spirit guide?
I am. Now again, it gets into, do you hear voices? Do you get touched? I don't have that experience like some people say they do. But I know that 24/7, there is somebody with me. I don't know who that is. You know, I believe, or I'd like to believe, it's a loved one. But doing this for 15 years, I have never had any loved one come through to me and talk to me or communicate with me.
What's this experience like of having this presence?
It can be peaceful. It can be calming. I think it's a case that, and we all do this whether we admit to it or not, we talk to ourselves. And I think that's part of, we're really talking to our spirit guide. I think that subconsciously, when we complain about things, or we, you know, I happen to play golf, and I'm the worst golfer in the world. I have a trophy that says that. And when I get in a real bad mood about a bad game of golf, I really believe that spirit guide is saying to me, calm down. What do you don't make any money out of playing golf, guy. You know, just, you're a lousy golfer. Just buy into it. And that helps me a lot. So I don't know that you can explain. See, you started down there.
So it
You can't
feels
explain.
like a loved one, but you can't identify the personality.
No.
Okay.
Now, mediums can.
Have you had a medium?
I have never had a medium read me.
See.
Well, I did.
Okay.
I had one medium read me one time. It's a long story, so I'll hold it. But it showed me that mediums can talk to the deceased, your cousins, your relatives, your son, your daughter, your mother, your father, whoever that might be. But you have to be open to that. See,
And what about you? Sorry.
No,
What
it's
about
not-
you, Mike?
As far as
This spirit guide. Because you're the one who brought it up. so
yeah,
I'm gonna hold you on that.
I believe in the idea of it. I don't personally know a physical connection, or I don't feel, I don't hear.
Okay.
It's more just, it's part of my intuition. It's part of,
Right.
Sometimes it's, I don't want to use the word miracle, but, because I don't mean something big and grand, but sometimes something almost like a car pushes you where you need to be and everything falls into place. Decisions like that, I think, I believe in it. I think it's around, but I'm not sensitive enough to idea it without a medium. Or
I got a sense when you were describing prepping for the experience on top of the mountain that there was a kind of an attunement process, that you were meditating. There's stars that have vibrational frequencies that are audible with certain machinery that can pick up that frequency and turn it into a sound or whatever.
Right.
And so you're in meditation, you're tuning in. Can you describe a little bit of that experience or that process?
Yeah, as we went along, we weren't sure how this was going to go at all. So what we'd do is we'd go into the meditation, and then when we came out, we would all journal what happened before we'd talk to each other. That way it wasn't, oh yeah, I think I had that happen too, and and get this feeding frenzy that you couldn't, at least this way we had it on paper, that, before we discussed any of it. And what we were finding is people were seeing a lot of the same shapes and symbols, either repeatedly throughout multiple sessions, or a certain session might have a certain theme that everybody picked up in one way or another from, one basic theme, but a different perspective of it. So we were starting to get things like that and realize, all right, maybe something is happening. And then when we tried bringing in new people in every once in a while, and we found that their first session would match what they experienced. Their first session would match what we experienced some of our first sessions. So it did seem like there was some type of rewiring or attunement, as you said, going on.
So should we open this up a little bit? What kind of research have you, I really want to hear your own stories, but what kind of research have you done? You've been into it for 10, 15 years?
Yeah, I've been,
Well, since you've been 3, so.
well, yeah, but more professionally, I guess you'd say. Been doing Granite Sky for about 3 years now. Seco Saucers before that for about 3 years. And then I've been hosting meetings just to openly talk about this stuff since 2011. But yes.
So you do investigations, you do,
Not so much.
what have you found out? What are people coming to you, telling you? You said you get a whole range of stories. What is the range?
You know, it's kind of, Bob can probably attest to this too, with some of the paranormal stuff. It's not so much necessarily the story, it's how the story's told. Like when somebody comes to me or a group for the first time, it kind of always starts out the same way. They say something, you know, they share a little bit of what they're going through, and it's very timid, very like, you know, I know I'm probably nuts, but have you seen this? And then, you know, you reply back and you won't hear from them. They get scared. Like, they like, oh no, they kind of internally freak out. Like, I've said too much. Like, I shouldn't have said anything. And then when they do finally ease back and come into a group or talk for the first time, they get what I call excited puppy syndrome, because they're like just so overwhelmed and overjoyed to like find this place they can talk about this stuff, because they haven't been able to their whole lives. I mean, and some of these people have been sitting on secrets for, you know, 60 years or within their own lives. So then they get this, just, you can't slow them down. It's like,
right.
Come down, we'll get to it.
Sure.
They just spit it all out. And then, you know, eventually they do kind of just calm down and settle into the flow. And, you know, so it's not, we don't necessarily sit down and be like, all right, we got to go through every experience you've ever had. I need to know, you know, in order, right? You know, for the most part, it matters. I'm curious. I want to know, and it helps them to get it off their chest, and it helps a guy across the room who's had the same experience go, oh, all right, you know, it helps with all that stuff, and it does get there. But the main point of most of what we do is to make sure this guy can sleep through the night so that he can get through the day. Because some of this stuff, it'll really, you know, it's the same as PTSD. The only difference is with PTSD, there's usually know what triggered it. But with this, all the effects are the same. You just, sometimes they can't pinpoint the moment that it happened.
Yeah.
Some of these experiences are traumatic then.
Very.
Very traumatic, yeah.
What, can you give us a for instance, or?
Yeah, some very much simulate rape cases. You know, just the fact of being taken by something that's non-human, you know, from a small age to having that just float around your whole life, where you're never in control. Like, you can be taken at any time. That, you know, that messes with people's psyche.
So I remember, you know, when Steven Spielberg started coming out with stuff and said there was Close Encounters of First, Second,
Star
Third,
Wars.
fourth kind, and the fourth kind, I think, was it actual connection or actual abduction, or and so you're talking about.
Yeah, the fourth kind's usually considered abduction. Hynek kind of invented the scale.
Who?
Alan Hynek.
Who's that?
He was paid by the government to debunk UFOs, basically, and he was their researcher. He would go out and try to find as many logical, mundane reasons to explain away these things. That was his job.
Wasn't that the Blue Book Project?
And then he got involved in Blue Book as well, yeah.
So when was this?
Blue Book was a project the government came up with to investigate UFO sightings from a perspective of, is there something out there? But the hidden agenda, I think, Mike, you'd agree with this, that the government had, was to cover up these stories, so that when you sat down and said, I had an experience, I was abducted, I went on, they put a needle in me, and so forth and so on, they would document this in Blue Book, and it would go no further. And they would warn people, like Betty and Barney Hill, which we'll talk about in a minute, but they would warn people not to tell that story to anybody else. Interestingly enough, Blue Book was closed down I think in 1970 or something, and they ended the project. In 1994, researchers went back to look at the notes from Blue Book, and they were all missing. This was documented by NBC, that they hired the researcher to go back and look at it. There has been a marked number, a big jump in the number of sightings. For example, in 2018, there were 3,000 documented sightings of UFOs. I'm talking documented now, where pictures were drawn, testimony was taken, people saw and or were abducted. In 2019, that number doubled. It's now 6,000. So the activity, Mike, is picking up. And for what reason?
So my chances are improving that I'm going to get to have one of these experiences.
Yeah,
I don't want the trauma, though.
Yeah, well,
I don't want the trauma.
Maybe. The problem with the reporting is, where the real number lies, because
Right.
all that really means is more people feel comfortable reporting now. There's still, the other problem is there's no one agency to report to. Some people report to the National UFO Reporting Agency, some people report to MUFON,
Right.
some people don't report at all.
Correct.
And these are, these are just reports. Technically, the worse you are at identifying things, the better chances you're going to are seeing a UFO, because it's all it means. And you can't stress that enough, is unidentified. It doesn't mean extraterrestrial. It doesn't mean. But I think with the internet and the shows and stuff, people are more confident to come out and say, "Hey, I saw something," where a lot of them, I don't think, are necessarily even looking for feedback. They're just like, "Hey, I saw something.
Right.
You guys investigate it. That's your thing. I'm just telling you what I saw."
Because they really didn't have a real traumatic experience. My daughter and myself on Route 111 coming out of Salem, driving up, something comes out of the sky, and it's, I don't know, 300 feet high maybe? I don't know. I really, my perception isn't good. Silent, and it's sitting there hovering over us. I wouldn't say it was round. It looked a lot like a drone. But it was close enough that it was a drone, we should have heard it. And it sat there. We got out of the car, and I said to my daughter, grab your phone and take a picture and magnify it. And she got out. As she was getting the thing ready to go, this object just took right off in a shot. Now, we saw it take off, and we saw the trail, but it was fast. I mean, real fast. Was that a UFO? And when I tell that story to people, they say, "So you saw a UFO?" I say, I did see a UFO because it's an unidentified flying object. Did I see an alien UFO is your real question, and I don't know what that was. It was silent, completely silent. There was absolutely no exhaust to this, no noise to this thing. Is it a high-tech drone? Could be. Who knows? I mean, I think technology is bringing a lot of this to the forefront that we never had before. I think if you go back to the 60s, and what is it, 1961 when the Exeter incident happened?
Exeter was 65. Hills was 61.
Yeah, 65. People didn't have the technology that we have today. So really, you had to believe in the newspaper. You had to believe in reports that you were reading, whether they were right or wrong. Today...
What happened in Exeter in 65? What's that story?
So what's usually known is the Exeter incident, or incident at Exeter, which kind of singles it out. There's a 4-week span with this incident in the middle of, 2 weeks leading up to it and 2 weeks behind it, of UFO sightings all in and around Exeter, across Phillips Academy, even down on Court and Front Streets. A lot of people were seeing stuff, but the big incident that gets all the credit is Norman Muscarella was 18. He was hitchhiking back from Amesbury, and he saw something in the field, shook him up, catches a ride back to the police station, and the officers go out with him, and the officers see it too. So because the officers saw it, it gained a lot of attention and credibility. And it's kind of one of these things, we always look for credible witnesses, but if it hadn't been the two officers, if any random person had picked them up and gone back out there and saw it, would this case have happened? Absolutely, but would we believe it? Probably not. Probably never would have heard of it.
Yeah,
What did they see?
and even though these two trained police officers described this disc with flashing lights moving up and down and left and right, the government come out and said that they were actually 4 B-47 bombers out of the Pease Air Force Base that flew over that night. Well, Officer Hunt, which was one of the two police officers, clearly said it could not be an airplane. It went left and right and up and down. We watched this happen. So what was it? It wasn't B-47 bombers. The second question is why were B-47 bombers flying over Exeter on that particular night?
They tried to say it was Operation Big Blast, a training refueling mission. Problem was, both of the officers, I believe, had military backgrounds, but one of the officers had worked on those planes in his military career. He was so familiar with them, he said he could identify them by sound. And he said there's no way that's not. The other thing is they all reported it, what they saw at the closest, at about 100 feet away from them and 100 feet off the ground. That's pretty close to not be able to identify a plane when you have a history with them.
Right.
And a plane that size you would hear. But then the problem came out. This is kind of the first time the government was ever put in this position where they didn't have their ducks in the row. So you have the Air Force issuing one statement, you have Project Blue Book issuing another statement. So that came out as it's temperature inversion. It was just twinkling stars. It wasn't.
Let me ask this question. Is there an importance to why now? The moment, like 1964, something happened. 1961, something happened. Is that a particular moment in human history in which these contacts are being made? There's a reason for these contacts and why they're happening then and not at other times?
Well, I mean, it's only one answer for, our little neck of the woods, because obviously, that's the problem with ufology too. We all know the big cases, and that's kind of put the timelines, but it's the unknowns. It's like the little people who come and sit in my room, once a month. Nobody knows their name. Nobody knows their story. It's just as valid as the one you see on TV, more valid in some cases. But, and that's just in our little neck of the woods. Yeah. That's across the board. The unknowns make the story, and we don't know it, So
you're saying it's happening all the time.
Yeah.
I have a theory on that. And I think Barney and Betty Hill, proves kind of my theory. My theory is this.
Barney and Betty Hill are?
Barney and Betty Hill, matter of fact, Mike was very influential in getting the plaque put up on the road that it happened. And I'm going to let Mike tell you the story. But basically the story is that they were driving home and came across a very bright light, red light flashing, to a point where he had to stop the automobile. And then they were ultimately abducted, taken aboard a spaceship. They were given many tests, pregnancy tests and everything else. They were then transported back to their vehicle. They lost multiple hours in between and drove home. Well, they told their story, and the military came out, and I'll let you tell some of the details of it, but the overview is that the military gave them what they called back in those days truth serum, which we know today is sodium pentothal. And they told the same story in two different rooms. And Betty drew a star map that she claimed while she was aboard the spaceship. She asked, "Where are you from?" And this one leader had brought up on a screen a star map showing the constellation of where they were. And she managed to draw that under hypnotism. They took the star map and put it to that constellation. It matched perfectly.
But not until 1969, they couldn't find the star. They didn't know the star system. It was unknown. It was Marjorie Fisher who found it all those years later and said,
"Who's Marjorie Fisher?"
And someone who does that sort of stuff.
Yeah, like an astronomer that does that. The other thing that's interesting about that case is, and I'll tell you, I said to you I have a theory, and I'll give it to you in a second. But the other thing interesting in that case, too, was that Barney and Betty Hill never made a nickel not 5 cents. They never wrote a book. They never made a movie. So they made no money from coming out. The other thing is, in 1961, they were an interracial couple, which unto itself, we all know, caused multiple problems for them, being an interracial couple back in the 60s. Although I hate to admit to that, but that was, not the norm. They both had very big jobs. So they brought all this attention to themselves. For what end? Mike and I talked earlier about this. When somebody comes in and says, I had an experience, I was abducted, the first thing I always look for is, what are they looking for? Are they looking for counseling? Are they looking for help? Are they looking to tell their story? Do they want to write a book? 90% of them, I bet 90%, just want to tell their story. So why wouldn't you believe them? To what end? Betty and Barney Hill went through this terrible, terrible time where the military kept taking them and having them, a psychiatrist talk to them and putting them under hypnosis. And the military, in my opinion, was trying to prove that they were not abducted, that it was a false story. You and I know that was a real story because there's too much proof and too much documentation to ignore it. But I think what happens is that I have an experience, a spaceship comes down, what do? I get in my car and run. So I don't think abduction is as popular because we avoid it. I wonder if you stood there and had that experience, if you just said, take me, I want to come aboard,
So
what
are
would
there
happen?
different alien groups that are coming, some that are mean, and you said raping people, and then there's other people that are doing medical exams, and then there's other people that are having this transcendence, awe-inspiring experience?
I mean, people report different, physical characteristics, and so that would lead to believe that, yes, there are different types of races visiting with different, intentions, but, whether something's good, bad, or, that's a matter of perception. Like, you can have if somebody underwent a physical exam, they could, very much see it as negative, but we do the same thing to animals to try to help them. We tag them, tranquilize them, do our tests, and, so trying to understand, we'd have to understand their motives before we could judge whether it's good or bad.
Sure.
But to jump back on Betty and Barney Hill real
I
quick.
think we can agree that rape is bad.
But, they never wanted their story told, and they didn't report the abduction at first because they didn't remember it. The only reason we know about the Betty and Barney Hill case is because it leaked in a newspaper in 1965. The only reason they were going to hypnosis was Barney was so troubled by these experiences that it was eating away his health, major ulcers. So they were he couldn't get past the missing time in his head. So they said, well, let's try to see if we can figure it out, and that'll help. And, Barney died very short, not like in minutes, but only a couple, years, like 69, I believe. This happened in 61. He had passed away in 69. This really had a traumatic effect on his life. And the thing, where they're local people, for anybody in Exeter, I've been to their graves and they have these big stupid plaques on them that says, of the interrupted journey. Like, everybody forgot that these were real people. They were just part of this story, and that, that frustrates me to no end.
And as you point out, they didn't want to be.
Right.
So if you understand the concept of they did not want this, then why would they even say, why didn't they just say, no, that, I dreamt that, I made that up and move on in your life? It's an experience like if you see a ghost. And I have seen full body apparitions right there in Kingston. When you see that, you now realize that you have crossed the line. You've crossed the line because a lot of people don't see that. You have. So your belief and your convictions become so much stronger than anyone else's, because I saw a full body apparition. I saw it appear and I saw it leave.
What about the crop circles?
What about them?
All right. Can you describe? There is a phenomenon called crop circles.
Correct.
I don't know if everybody knows, but from what I've understand is there's a field, it's a farmer's field, and the next day, there's this incredible, intricate geometric pattern in which, in the field, and the plants themselves are bent, but they're not broken.
Correct.
And how is that explained? Is there a correspondence with UFOs and crop circles in your mind, or what is the?
I mean, it's one of the bigger theories out there that it's UFO related. I think it very well could be. Could very well, be some type of magnetic from the Earth itself sending the message up to something too. I'm not real sure, but yeah, I mean, there's definite real differences between a fake crop circle, like, the answer is these two old guys went out there with boards and, they made every crop circle. No, there's no way. But yeah, like, what if somebody goes out there and physically manipulates and tries to make a crop circle, the plants break, they don't bend. There's heat, there's other things like the nodes of the plant will expand and explode, showing some type of almost radiation or heat.
Heat, yeah.
There's lots of times iron will be like pulled out of the soil in little deposits and brought to the top. There's little trademarks that people look for who study these things that kind of identify it as a real crop circle versus a man-made or a hoax.
I think too that what happens in both our fields is that there are a lot of, especially with technology the way it is today, Photoshop and crop circles. There were two gentlemen that admitted to making some of those crop circles, I believe in Scotland or someplace like that. Anyways, they admitted they did the crop circles. But the ones that you're talking about that are so intricate, at least my opinion is, those are a message. We can't figure out the message, right? We don't have the key to figure that code out, but we're going to eventually. Because some of these crop circles, the big ones with designs in them and arrows and everything else, circles spelling out some sort. If you looked at one of them was almost followed the DNA structure, how it's built. So that's a message from somebody.
Which was actually in response to something we had sent out that
That's correct.
Matched it.
That's correct. It's telling us something. I believe it's a message saying, we're here, we know you, we've been visited. There is at least a concept that aliens are among us, that they walk among us all the time, that they've been put on Earth to monitor and check and find out. Now, was that because a planet somewhere out there?
What do you mean they're among us?
Huh?
What do you mean they're among us? Like they take on human bodies?
Humanoids.
They take on human bodies?
They take on a human form.
How do they do that?
Who knows? I mean, when you die, how do you become a ghost?
Well, you want to know what I think that I pre-existed, and so I'm going to continue to exist. So I think
A concept that very well may be. We may live in dimensions
Right.
where we go back and forth, right? We can, but who created those dimensions?
well, that's a creator.
See, I believe UFOs go back to the days of the pyramids. Because I think in tombs, they have, you sent me a link the other day, a 5,000-year-old tomb clearly had what we would describe, I guess, as an alien, the white form, large head, large eyes.
It were like cave paintings.
Exactly. So it's 5,000 years back. I mean,
The images were similar to what is reported by people today.
today, correct. So how does that happen? And what happens, Dan, in this field is that we all, too often, people outside the research field, they want to look at the phony ones. They want to talk about that was photoshopped, that guy did his own crop circle. Why don't we look at the percentage of ones we can't explain? Because if you took one crop circle, just one, in 2020, that you can't explain what it is, you can't explain how it got there. Some of these crop circles, there's no entrance in or out.
Right.
I've heard people say, well, they could drop them from a helicopter. I guess you could be lowered down to do that. But to what end are you doing that? I mean, is someone going to pay you $100,000 because you did a crop circle? There's no money in that.
Right.
So to me, when we see a crop circle that we can't explain with those kind of circles and everything else, it has to be a message from somewhere. And we have to decode that message. I'm a big conspiratorist guy, and I believe the government covers all of this up. I'd be interested in knowing, why is the government so afraid of us knowing about UFOs? And you know this, there's plenty of evidence of cover-up. You know, in the Roswell, they immediately said it was a weather balloon that crashed with 3 dummies on board, because the farmer saw 3 bodies. So they had to explain it away. But in 1994, the government admitted that was a fake story about the weather balloon.
So let's go back. Roswell.
Sure.
That's Area 51?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry, that was definitive.
Yeah, a lot of people confuse the two. That is a separate area in Nevada.
Right.
More of a secret test base. Some people think they have UFO technology. Whether they do or don't, that's, up in the air. But yes, no, that's totally separated from Roswell. The problem with the Roswell is they first came out and said,
When did this occur?
1947.
47.
We have a downed saucer. And then they retracted the next day and said, oh, it's a weather balloon. And the story disappeared.
Right.
They effectively shut that down till the 80s, pretty much, until Stanton Friedman and some others kind of re-brought it up and said,
Who?
Stanton Friedman.
Who's that?
He was a top UFO researcher who just
Okay.
passed this year. Kind of brought it back to light, but the story stayed fairly hidden. And then there were the stories of the bodies. So when the Air Force said, no, those were the Mogul test dummies, the problem was...
What kind of test dummies?
Mogul. A Mogul was a type of weather balloon they were saying this whole project was. We didn't use those dummies. We didn't have them in 47. They
Correct.
didn't come out. But the fact of it is, not only is it a horrible lie, for some reason the Air Force felt they had to comment on the bodies.
Correct. Well, the reason I think for that is that the farmer said he saw 3 bodies. There wasn't any doubt about that. Once they admit that the weather balloon story is a fake, well, now you have a problem with 3 bodies, because those aren't fake. The farmer saw those 3 bodies. What he saw in the crash site, I'll give you the fact, he couldn't tell whether it was a weather balloon and or a UFO. So if the government admits that the weather balloon thing was a fake, you have another problem then. How do you explain the 3 bodies, and where are they? I believe they're in Area 51. I think that's where they locked them up. That's why they're so secured over there. And I do believe that was a UFO that crashed.
Well, and here's the thing. It wasn't just some low man sitting at a desk who went out there and misidentified this stuff.
Right.
The 509th Bomb Ring was stationed in Roswell when this happened.
Correct.
Dean Merchant is a great guy to talk to about this stuff. But eventually the 509th flies out to Pease Air Force
What's
Station.
509? What's that?
It's the world's most elite bombing wing.
Yeah,
They're the ones who dropped the bomb and
Hiroshima.
Nagasaki. And
Let me just give you guys a time. We're kind of close to wrapping up, so I want to hear the resolution of this story, but also kind of hear, some high point or some kind of summary statement that you'd like to make, and where you're going to take the show.
Yeah.
But finish up this little 509.
So the 509th ends up moving to Pease. They're here during Betty and Barney Hills, during Exeter, during the height of, New Hampshire's UFO activity. They're here. They end up moving out of here when we put in the Seabrook nuclear plant, because they're not going to have the world's most elite bombing force that close to something that could go wrong or, be used against us. So they move out to Wright-Patterson, where if you know anything about ufology, that is supposedly where everything goes. So
Ray Patterson?
Wright-Patterson.
What?
Wright.
Wright-Patterson?
Wright
What's
Patterson.
It's an Air Force base.
Air Force Base.
that? Where is that?
Ohio.
Okay.
Is it? Yeah. Yeah.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
But, can you directly connect UFOs and 509? Maybe not, but there are some interesting correlations if you follow it.
Okay, well, thank you guys for coming out.
Well, thanks for having us.
This is a fascinating story, and I think we can unpack this and unpack this and unpack. There's a lot of.
And this really is where Paranormal Mysteries is going to go, Dan,
Okay.
is to talk about things like that, because I believe the truth is out there. I'm stealing that line from someone. But it's people like Mike Stevens that can get to the truth because he's researched it so much. And you're going to find on Paranormal Mysteries in the future, that's what medium, when we bring a medium on, we want to know how that medium does it. And we're going to have the medium do a reading right then and there and see if it's accurate. So we're going to get to the truth. That's what we're all searching for. Any paranormal research person, right, Mike? We're looking for the truth. If somebody ever says to me, we can prove ghosts don't exist, I'll accept that. I'll accept it. But somebody has to explain to me what I saw. But thank you for having us.
Thanks, and good luck with
Thank you.
launching a new show. And
I hope you'll come on.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thanks for joining us on the McGraw Research Report. And hope you enjoyed this show.